to Birmingham, Alabama this afternoon. Dr. Oje is leading a leadership summit tomorrow for the pastors in the Birmingham Metro Baptist Association. So he wanted you to know where he was tonight. All right, Ms. Fran, come introduce our speaker.
I'm so glad that you're here this evening, and I'm glad to be here as well. We're going to be blessed by the message that we will hear from our guest speaker, Pat Melanson. His wife, Victoria, was supposed to come with him, but she had back surgery a while back, and she just wasn't feeling well enough to come out tonight. But I'm looking forward to it, and I'm sure you are as well, looking forward to hearing from Pat Melanson. I feel so blessed to be a part of this church family that is so mission-minded. So thank you for supporting our missionaries and praying for them and giving to our mission projects. So, Pat.
Thank you. I was really excited to hear that Reggie was going to be your interim. When he was interim at First Baptist Lafayette, we were actually back in the U.S. during that time, and he's a great preacher. I enjoy hearing Reggie's preaching. Well, my name is Pat Melanson. My wife's name is Veronica, and she's sorry she couldn't be here tonight, but she had a hip replaced a few weeks ago, and she wasn't quite sure how far she was going to have to walk tonight. And so we decided best that she'd not come. Now, we are IMB missionaries. This is me and my wife, and actually, y'all might know this place. This is on Bayou Teche. This is actually where the Acadians landed. Whenever they came to Louisiana, that was the first place where they kind of shot off from and went from there. And we're very much into our history and the history of our family and stuff like that, where they've come from. But this is me and Veronica. Now, we have a fairly large family. We have 5 kids. And back in March 23rd, our last son got married. Hallelujah. And that's Luke and Kaylee in the middle. And these are all of our kids and our grandkids. And they're scattered all over the southeastern part of the United States. We have one son who lives and his wife live in Zachary. They have a grandson with them and another baby on the way in May. And then our son Caleb and his wife live in New Orleans, and they have twins. And then we have another son who lives in Birmingham, and they've got 3. That's Ben over here. And they have 3 grandkids there. And then we have a daughter, Hannah, and her husband, Josh, who live in northeast in Blairsville, Georgia. And they have a little girl, and we have she has another baby on the way in July. So we have 7 grandkids with 2 more on the way. And that's always very exciting for us, for me and Veronica. So we do a lot of traveling to see our grandkids, and these are our current grandkids. When we got together for the wedding, that was the first time in 10 years that all of our family could be together. And so it was special. It was very, very, very special. Okay, so let me tell you about the work that Veronica and I do and where we live. We actually live in northern Thailand in a place called Chiang Mai. You can see this little dot right here. And I think some of you knew Kim and Quentin Ratliff, and they're dear friends of ours, and we lived in the same city in northern Thailand. And we have been on the field for 24 years. And when we went to the field, we were the first career-appointed missionaries by the IMB to go into Burma. But we had been there about 9 months roughly, and they asked us to pray about overseeing disaster response for the IMB worldwide. And because of my background with FedEx, I used to work with FedEx, and I oversaw all of FedEx's philanthropy worldwide, and I was an assistant to our CEO, Fred Smith. And so they thought, I could be a good fit for that. So we started doing that January 1st of 2001, and we began to oversee disaster response worldwide. And then over time, of course, our job changed. Now, the area that we're responsible for right now is within this yellow square. It's 4.4 billion people. More than 50% of the world's population lives in this square. About 90% of the disasters that occur every year occur in that square. 98% of the people who die every year in a non-earthquake year die from disasters, earthquakes, or other disasters in that square. So we stay very busy with disaster response, but also community development. So what I want you to see tonight, what I want to do is give you an overview of what we do as your IMB missionary, so you can understand that there is a method to the madness. So when you look at the missionary task, these are the things that as missionaries we try to focus upon doing. We try to get into communities, evangelize, do discipleship, help churches to form in a healthy way, develop their leadership, and then exit to partnership. And what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to go through each step of this, and I'm going to show you some very practical examples of projects that we do. Now, what you're going to see tonight is just a small sampling of the work that Veronica and I are able to do in the jobs that we have. You're going to see tonight probably about 7 or 8 projects that we've done. But literally, over the last 24 years, I've probably done closer to about 450 projects. But you're going to see what we're doing, what we did. But I want you to understand all of this that we do is because of what you do here as a Southern Baptist Church and the way that you support us. But a question that I often get in the work that we do is, should we help them? Should we help those people? And most of the time, that question comes from people in our U.S. churches. So tonight what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you why we should help them and what God has done by us being willing to do that. Now, as you know, as I do, we're surrounded by need on every corner. You go to the red light, there's someone there in need. You go to the airport, there's someone there in need. You come to a lot of places around the world. When we go, the people are always in need, but we need to be careful not to grow weary in doing good to assist those people. We need to make sure that as we look at the need, we ask God, what should we do? And realize that God doesn't want us to meet all the needs around the world. Jesus did not meet everybody's need. That's a shocking thing, but it's true. He did not meet all the needs that surrounded him. So we have to be careful not to grow weary in doing good. So should we help them? Let's look first of all at entry. When I'm talking about entry as a missionary, I'm talking about getting into a community that we did not have access before. And the very first picture I'm going to show you is in Indonesia after we had an earthquake and tsunami in the Indian Ocean. This is in Aceh. This was downtown Aceh, where 250,000 people died within 15 minutes in this area. Think about that. I don't know how many people you can put in the LSU Tiger Stadium. How many people can it hold? 100,000? Multiply that times 2.5. That's how many people died in 15 minutes in Aceh. And when our team got to the area, we came upon this woman. And she was just weeping. And so as our team began to talk to her, I can't speak Bahasa Indonesian, but one of our team members could. When he was speaking to her, he asked her, what do you need? And what she had discovered is she saw her mother's body up in the debris and wanted to know if we could help to get her down. And we couldn't. Our team couldn't because we didn't have the equipment. There was no way that we could actually get to the body, but our team could get to the body. But the questions that often come up is, why did this happen? Is God responsible for this tragedy? And are we responsible for helping those in need? Again, that question, should we help them? So in an area where there were no churches, should we help them? We had been denied access to this area for a long period of time. The night before this tsunami happened, earthquake and tsunami happened, we were in Chiang Mai and we were at a shopping area. And the team leader for that area was there, and he and I were talking. And he said, Pat, we have to continue to pray that God's going to give us access to this area. When this happened, we got access to the area. Access that many people did not have, and we were allowed to stay there for a long period of time. So we got entry. We got access to an area that we did not have before. We got access to parts of Sri Lanka. When the tsunami came into this area, it actually knocked this train over, and they picked up the train. But the wave was so powerful, it was above this train. It had knocked the train over, and then they brought some cranes in to upright it. About 35,000 people killed in this area. In an area where there were a few Christians, should we help them? In an area where children's parents were killed, like this little girl and her brother, her parents were killed, should we help them? So that's the question, should we help them? Well, in that part of the missionary task, we were able to get access to areas that we did not have access to before. And so one of the things we try to do is we try to make sure that we get entry. Then we come to the second. Now, each of these can be done independently or in succession, but we also look at evangelism. How can we share the gospel through community development, disaster response, meeting hunger needs, and stuff like that? How can we do evangelism through those things that I just mentioned? Well, we had a cyclone that hit Burma. It was called Cyclone Nargis. And we went in, we began to do assessments. We got into some communities that there were fishermen their boats were completely destroyed, and they needed to be able to earn a living somehow to get food. So what we did as Southern Baptists is we said, if you're willing to work in your community, then every evening we will give you food for that day's labor. It was a food for work type of a program. So what did they want to do? In this village, they wanted to build roads. No bulldozers. We had picks, shovels, and baskets to carry dirt. And they made their own bricks. And so they began to work on making a road. These were people from some of those villages. We actually worked in 11 villages during that time. And these were some of the Burmese people there who were receiving food. They were grateful, of course, to get the food. This is them preparing food outside for their entire village. They would cook in these community pots, and then they would serve the people the food. These were kids eating food at lunchtime. Now, you might have a question of what is that? What is the yellow stuff on their faces? It's actually called thanaka. Thanaka is a bark of a tree that's crushed, and they take the white powder and they put it on their faces as a sunscreen. Now, interestingly, when we talk to people in Asia or even in Myanmar, in Burma, and we talk about people here in the United States who want to go to a tanning salon, you see, the lighter your skin, the higher your status. Because that means you don't have to work as hard. You're not out in the sun laboring all day long. So they cannot understand why would Americans want to go in a tanning salon and get darker. They just don't understand that. Now, what we would do is during the day, we would help with construction. There was a variety of things we did. We did roads. We built bridges. All of this being done by hand. The supplies being supplied by Southern Baptists. The food being supplied by Southern Baptists. You know, whenever you give to the World Hunger Fund, those funds come to us and we use them. But every afternoon, whenever it would begin to get too hot to work, people would come in and they would hear Bible teaching. Now, this is my national partner there. His name is actually John Albert. And every day he would teach the Bible. Every day he would teach the Bible. Now, Burmese generally are very literate. They can read, but they don't have the materials printed. So we actually had the print materials for them to have, and you can see like this one lady right here is actually Hindu. So some of the villages we worked in were Buddhist villages. Some of them were Hindu villages. But we would go and we would teach them the Bible. We would share the gospel, and then we would pray with them. Now, we were working, remember I said, initially in 11 villages. So as we worked and we began to teach the Bible, people began to get saved. And they kept getting saved. And they kept getting saved. And we were looking for any place we could baptize people. We baptized them in water troughs. We baptized them in lakes. We baptized some of them in pools. We were running out of places to baptize people. And people were coming to Christ. And so this is actually the first church that we started in the village. By the time we finished our work there, we had 10 new churches, over 400 new believers, and God was just at work. Now, again, this is an opportunity for evangelism that we would not have had if Cyclone Nargis had not gone through this area. So should we help them? Now we get to the third part of the missionary task, and that's discipleship. That's after people become believers, beginning to teach them about what that means. Now, in this particular project that we did, this was on the border of China and Burma. People inside of Burma, in the northeastern part of Burma, in the Shangadam Valley, were starving. They were eating leaves off of trees. So we found out about it, that some churches told us about it, and so we thought this is a great opportunity for us to teach new believers how they can assess need and how they can meet need, and at the same time share the gospel. Now, this lady right here with the baby on her back, we were trekking into the area. We're trekking across the border from China into Myanmar, and she had to walk 7 days to come and get food, and then 7 days to walk back. And of course, she had a small baby. When I saw her initially, she was coming down the mountain. We were trekking up the mountain, trekking over into China, and she was coming down the mountain, had the baby on her back. And then the next time I saw her, she was coming up the mountain with about 40 pounds of rice on her head, strapped to her head, down her back, and she was breastfeeding her baby while she was walking. But she needed food. Now, you can see from this picture, this is that trek that we had to do. It was a very, very difficult trek. And this was my crew that I had up here with me. But the way that they carried the rice is they would actually put the rice in a sack and then they would support it on their head. They didn't do like a backpack thing like we do. They supported the rice on their foreheads. And the thing about it is that it was a long walk for them to come and get rice. Now you might be saying, well, Brother Pat, why didn't y'all just drive into the area and just drop off the rice for them to have? Well, one, the government would not allow us to do that in Burma. But number two, the closest road to where the Shangadam Valley was and where these villagers lived was 24 walking days away inside of Burma. And you might say, well, Brother Pat, how much rice can you transport that way? We transported, I said we, not me. They walked over the border, got rice, and walked back. We transported 110 tons of rice that way. And they'd come and get rice, and they'd walk back. Come and get rice, and they'd walk back. But we saw this as an opportunity to teach the church, to disciple new believers in the church, and how do you assess need, and how do you meet that need? The question comes up again, should we help them? Now we come to healthy church formation. After we enter into an area and evangelism occurs and new believers, people get saved, we begin to disciple them, we now want to try to develop a healthy church. We don't want to just put something together and call it a church. We want it to be a healthy church. Something that can take what's being taught and then they can run with it as a church and be an independent church on their own. This man is Makan. He's a sea gypsy. When we had a tsunami that hit the Andaman Sea, his people lived on 5 islands. They had an oral tradition that whenever the water withdraws quickly, the spirits are angry and they're going to come back very quickly to kill you. So when the tsunami happened and the water withdrew from the beaches, people ran up into the mountains. And when the water came back, we only had one Marcan that was actually killed on these islands. But when we got to these islands, when we heard about what had happened, I was able to lease, I guess you'd say, a pretty good-sized boat. And I'm not calling it a boat. I'm calling it not even a boat. It's more like a ship, a small ship. And we stocked it with food. And we started going to the islands. And this man was the leader of the tribe on his island. Now, he's Marcan. And what's interesting about him at this time is that they worshiped spirits and trees. They had no Bibles. They had no churches. And most of them had never met a Christian before. So when we get to the island, we go on shore and we're talking with him. Now, we had to have someone who could speak Marcan and also could speak Thai, who could then tell me what they were saying. And so this gentleman, I had purchased a lot of canned sardines. Now, you know, sardines are okay to eat. Not something I would consider a main staple of mine. But so we had sardines, we had rice, we had noodles, a lot of things. And so I sit down with this man in his little wooden hut there, and we're talking to the translator, of course. And I told him that I had brought him some sardines. Now, I gave him a can of sardines, and it's a specific kind in Thailand. It's called Three Mamas Sardines, a nice red can. And he looked at that can, and he said, "This is so beautiful." He had never seen a can before in his life. So he looks at the can, and so I want to show him, you know, how do you take sardines out of a can? You know, and think about this for a second. Someone who's never seen a can before in their life, and you're going to have to show them how to flip it open and then pull the sardine out. So I'm sitting there. We're sitting on the floor. I open the can. Then I open the can for him. Then I reach inside and I pull the sardine out. As you know, sardines are pretty small to fit in the can. I pull the sardine out. And I show him how to pull the sardine out. And then I show him, you know, how to put it in your mouth and eat it. And it had tomato sauce on it. And so he took it. You know, and he put it in his mouth and he shuddered because he had never tasted tomato sauce before. But he kept saying, "This is such a beautiful thing. Such a beautiful thing." So we're sitting there and we're talking. And I see him motion to someone to my right. And whoever that was walks out. So we're still talking. And, so we had cases, hundreds of cases of these sardines to give to these islands. And rice and noodles. And we were unloading it. And before I knew it, someone entered the room to my right, and I could kind of see the shadow of him. And they entered in, and this man had a gift for me. What was it? A yellowfin tuna that was about this long. And I'm thinking, I am giving a man sardines, and he can eat fresh yellowfin tuna every day. You know, but let me tell you what he did. They took the canned sardines that we gave them, and they put them in their houses as decorations. So every time we'd go back, we could see that the cans of sardines were still there, uneaten. But to them, it was a reminder of how beautiful things could be, but it was also a reminder of the Christians who came to help them. So that was a great blessing. But there was something else about this community that we could do as Southern Baptists that nobody else could do. This community had no health care. This community had no education. They had no schools. This community didn't have clean water. So as we began to dig and try to find out what needs to be done for these people because they were Thai citizens. What do we need to do for them to actually get those things that they should have from the government? This is what we found out. The government said the reason why they don't have any benefits is because they do not have an address. What do you need to have an address? In Thailand, a street. So what did we do as Southern Baptists? We built streets in the villages. And you can see it's roughly about 1.5 meters, 2 meters wide. had to be 30 meters long. And once we did that, the government said they now have an address. So they started providing health care, education, and all the things that other communities in Thailand have. Now, when we got to these 5 islands, there were no Christians, there were no churches. 3 years later, every island had a church, and we had close to 500 new believers on those islands. And again, we could not have done what we did if you did not do what you do here in the United States. This is my wife and I. We were actually helping to build a dry dock where they could come in and repair their boats and stuff like that. Should we help them? Now we come to the next step of the missionary task, and that's leadership development. How do we develop leaders? After a church is formed, how do we help that leadership to be better in what they do? Now, in an area where a home is bamboo and it was destroyed by a typhoon that came through, and this family of 5 makes $20 a month, should we help them? And we did. We began to meet with the community. We found out what their needs were. We met with local government officials. We found out what their needs were. We met with the community, and they began to hear about what we were trying to do to help them, to help themselves. And what was so interesting is that prior to this point, the culture in this community meant that no one trusted anyone else in the community. But after this disaster happened, we began to meet with them, and they were beginning to trust each other. Then another typhoon came through. And when the second typhoon came through, suddenly they realized we need each other. So we began to meet with them during the day, and we would teach the Bible at night. And it wasn't long before the government approached us and said, do you think you could help us to build a shelter that these people could go to whenever a typhoon is headed their way? And we said, of course we can do that. But we said, but if we help build the shelter, can we also use that shelter for community meetings? And the government said, of course. So what did we do with that? We used that as a place to teach the Bible in addition to other places. So the community got together and they began to do building. Southern Baptist supplied all of the materials that they needed. They supplied all of the labor. And we began to, again, teach the Bible in there and other places in the village. People began to come to Christ, and we began to see people baptized. And this was one of the buildings that was used as a church later. So should we help them? Now we get to this last point.